Well, now I would like to introduce to you Jerry Pinkert. And Jerry retired from local government in Mecklenburg County. Am I correct, Jerry? You were involved with
Yes,
IT and a few other things. And
correct.
so this is a great presentation. I'm going to say, take it away. And you're able to share your screen.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. Let me see if I can get my presentation up here. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Well, thanks for attending today. I'm pleased to see so much interest in this topic. I hope this will be useful to you. And as Daryl mentioned, I'm Jerry Pinkert. I'm a District 6 NCRGA board member, and I did retire from Mecklenburg County in 2010 after 22 years as their IT director. I have an interest in financial planning. It's maybe a little bit of a hobby in my retirement, and I'm not a financial planner, but I do participate in a number of financial forums, so I have found this topic to be interesting and also very relevant to me, and I suspect it will be to many of you. And I have done this topic a few times already to members of other districts. And okay, just to let you know, this is the letter of final instructions to your loved ones upon your passing. And it's a complete and up-to-date set of written instructions for your loved ones and executor to follow for disposition of your estate and last wishes, or for your family to follow if you're ruled incompetent. That's something that is a reality in our current. The older you get, the greater chances of becoming incompetent, either through dementia or Alzheimer's. So though that would also require this documentation. And the agenda that we have today, let's see if this is a list of the things that we'll cover today, and really the inspiration for this letter is, I think in most joint households, retirees, you'll have one spouse who handles all the business and financial matters, or at least most of them, and the other one oftentimes really doesn't know what's going on in that regard, except in a general sense. And so they would be very vulnerable once the other party that does handle all of these matters passes on. And another factor to consider is, 20 years ago, you could probably muddle your way through things, even if it wasn't well documented, because most things were in paper format. All your records were in paper. Nowadays, we have a much more complex digital world, and a lot of things are in this digital world. They're not on paper anymore. So that makes it a more daunting task to try to keep up with everything. And finally, as I mentioned, the financial forums I participate in, one of those is, I would characterize the people within that as mostly people that are very astute with finance, investments, and taxes. And they tend to be very detail-oriented people. There was an interesting discussion that was conducted a few years ago. Someone was talking about what documentation to leave for their loved ones with their passing. And interestingly enough, many of the people that commented on that were not in good shape in that regard. And I was one of those. So one of my tasks was to address that problem and try to provide good documentation for my family. So the things we'll cover, we'll talk some about all the types of things that would go in your letter, and then where documentations are located, because as I've mentioned, they oftentimes are no longer just in paper. They may be in digital form somewhere. And then, of course, talking about digital records. Taxes is a very important topic. And then funeral arrangements. We'll talk briefly about a letter format, and that can vary depending on the complexity of your situation as well as your personal preference. And then finally, a few final recommendations. And just a disclaimer up front is the advised examples and lists are intended as general advice. They do not apply to every situation and are not exhaustive. Your situation may be different and have additional items not covered in this presentation. So finally, it is not legal or financial advice. So a few examples, and I have actually, I think there are 3 slides on this. The types of items to go within your letter. First, you have to explain where everything is located, whether it's in paper format, digital, or in a safety deposit box or a safe, and then identify what estate documents you have. And then a contact list or list. This would include personal contacts, friends, family, pastor, etc., as well as business contacts and your attorney, financial advisors, and tax preparer, and so forth. And then who should be informed whenever you pass. And this could be from both a personal and a business perspective. And then contact information, including online addresses for businesses. Most businesses today don't want you to call them, and they seem to go at great lengths to avoid giving you a phone number. So online addresses for businesses is really important. And then we mentioned funeral arrangements. I think all of us have pensions with the local or state government and Social Security. And one thing to point out here is you need to not only list the things to be dealt with, but explain how they're to be handled. And that may become self-evident. In some cases, it isn't, and requires more explanation. Okay. Then all the various types of insurance that you have, life, auto, home, and so forth. Any banks and credit union accounts that you have, whether it be checking, savings, credit cards, etc. Any investment accounts you have, whether it's an IRA, a 401k, a Roth account, brokerage, CDs, and so forth. And the beneficiaries to financial accounts. I recommend that you have a beneficiary for all asset accounts, because those may change over the course of your lifetime, and it's much easier to change it with the particular business account you have, as opposed to put it in your will. To put it in your will, whenever it changes, you have to pay an attorney to change it. So you don't want to have to do that. The accounts to change would typically include joint accounts with your spouse. And of course, business accounts can be utilities, cell phones, and many others. And the executor needs to know about all of these accounts so they can take the appropriate action. A few more examples: outstanding liabilities, loans, mortgages, taxes, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. I always recommend a net worth statement because in the course of our lifetime, we accumulate a lot of stuff. A lot of it is, maybe more sentimental value, but there are some with real tangible value. It could be other property, it could be antiques, jewelry, hobby collections, and so forth. So it's good to put those in one place, so your heirs will be aware of what those are, because they may not be listed elsewhere, and it could be something of value. And medical providers, which is relevant if someone is ruled incompetent. Digital assets like phones and computers and social media with all the information that they might hold, and miscellaneous things like security systems or cameras. Someone needs to know the password, how to manage that. And of course, some retirees have businesses that they conduct in retirement. So it's important to have good records for that. And then the last thing here to talk about is I recommend that everyone freeze the three major credit bureaus, TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. Anytime you open an account, one of those is checked to check your account, check your credit. And so from a personal identity protection, this is a very good thing to do, because if someone somehow they steal your identity, and this happens all the time nowadays, in order for them to open an account in your name, they have to go to one of those credit bureaus. And if they're frozen, they'd be unable to open an account. And you can actually, I would recommend going to, if you haven't already, go to each of those credit bureaus, open an account. Once you do that, you'll be able to freeze and unfreeze your credit at will, and you can do that online. Because, for example, we bought another car earlier last year, and even though I wasn't financing it with the dealership, they had to run a credit check on me. And I had to. I bought a new phone about a year ago, same thing, and so they will tell you which credit bureau they use. You can go in online and unfreeze that for a limited period of time to do that transaction. But then it's refrozen to protect your identity. And excuse me, the location of important documents is really something to be concerned about. For example, in paper, we'll typically have any estate documents or deeds, titles, and a location of safety deposit keys, or a combination for a safe if you have that, any insurance policies, and some personal identity records like birth certificate, social security card, driver's license. And even though you may have passed, these records still need to be protected, because thieves could get that information and establish accounts in your loved one's name. And that's certainly not something you want to have to deal with while you're dealing with the estate. And then things that might be in paper or digital, or perhaps a combination, or bank statements, income tax returns, investment account statements, and all your various business accounts. And one thing that I recommend there, if they are in digital form, is that maybe once a year you print out a copy of that statement for each of them, because sometimes it might be necessary to refer to that in terms of dealing with your estate. I don't know where that's coming from.
I'm gonna try to find where I can fix it.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Jerry, I'm gonna mute everybody, so then unmute yourself.
Okay,
Okay,
okay. All right, thank you, Daryl.
you're welcome.
And if you have extensive paper files, you should provide a layout of where categories of things are to simplify people's, finding things within your records. And really the same thing applies to digital records. You should have meaningful names for like taxes, checking investments, and so forth. And then where important documents are kept, like, in a safety deposit box or a safe. Okay, and this is something that's changed within the last, I'd say, 20 years. As digital records have evolved to become commonplace in all of our lives, there are some things that have changed with that. North Carolina enacted a law in 2016 to govern access of digital assets, and most other states have done the same thing. It's called the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets. And essentially it outlines what needs to be done in order to properly, legally access these digital records. One of the things our estate attorney did is provide a document for me and my wife Judy, each of us, which is a digital assets authorization and consent for release. And so this is a document you can present to someone who has your digital records. And in some cases, this may not be terribly important, but in a lot of others it is. For example, if if your loved one had a Facebook account and they were very active within Facebook, and they, posted a lot of stuff about birthdays, anniversaries, key events, vacations, what have you. There's a lot of information there of great sentimental value to their family. So Facebook, with proper authorization, will memorialize that page so that you can refer to it as you wish. And if you don't have the proper authorization, you would be unable to do that. And I'm not sure what others have, like Twitter, but they may well have similar type. The key is you sort of have two sets of rules. One is the law that the states have enacted, and then you also have the policies of these social media companies. So if some of this is important to you, you should really check with the social media companies to make sure that this can be passed on upon your death. And another thing to remember here is that it's illegal. Let me start over. Whenever you pass, all of your assets, digital and otherwise, pass on to your estate. They're no longer yours. They belong to your estate, and so it's illegal to access those accounts. For example, let's say you gave your ID and password to an investment account or your checking account to someone. It's illegal for them to access that without proper authorization. Now, if a joint account with your spouse, that doesn't apply, but anyone else it would apply to. So you need to be very careful about that. Some attorneys advise against disclosing IDs and passwords to prevent, heirs from getting into trouble on that account. But it's something to be aware of. But where these records are at, I mean, it could be on your computer hard drive, it can be on a thumb drive, it could be somewhere in the cloud. So it's important to identify where they are and how they should be accessed: name, address, phone number, and so forth. And again, optional is log-on IDs and passwords, but some caution with that. Okay, as far as estate documents, I will say that discussion of estates is outside the scope of this presentation, but I will mention a couple of things. First is power of attorney and durable power of attorney. The difference between those two is power of attorney ceases if someone becomes incompetent, whereas a durable power of attorney would remain in effect. But both of these cease at the time of death. That's where the executor of the estate will take over. Another thing to mention here is having a healthcare power of attorney, someone that can speak on your behalf when you're unable to do so. And then an advance directive, which essentially describes how medical care is to be done in certain circumstances. In other words, when to pull the plug. That's really important because it's a very difficult decision for families to make. And so you can take that, the stress and the difficulty of that away from them by simply in advance saying how things are to be done. We mentioned the digital assets authorization and consent for release. Personal property, a lot of times this is not of great value, maybe more sentimental value, but it's you can avoid a lot of frustration amongst family by stipulating how all those things are to be distributed upon your death. And trust is, if estates are beyond the scope of this presentation, then that goes double for trust. There are a lot of different types, and they can get rather complicated, and it's beyond the scope of this. One thing that's really important is taxes. The IRS requires you need to have copies of the last 7 years tax returns with the supporting documentation. The IRS only requires 3 years, but if they audit and find a discrepancy, they can go back 7 years. So it's important to make sure you not only have the tax returns, but any supporting documentation, because if you claim a deduction and they ask you what the justification for that is, if you can't support it, then you'll lose that deduction. Most people today either use tax software like TurboTax, H&R Block, or others, or they use a firm to do their taxes. So you need to identify how that's done. And I think something that's sometimes overlooked, or often overlooked, is the tax records for the current year. A lot of people, myself included, get serious about my taxes for the year just ended after the year has ended. And it's easy, well, almost it's easy, it's easier for me to reconstruct everything that I need to deal with my taxes for that year. But if someone's coming behind you and you're not there to do it, it can be very difficult for them to figure out what maybe has already been done or not done. For example, estimated taxes. Have you done that this year? A required minimum distributions, which is something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Is you get past age 72, the government requires you to distribute a portion of your IRAs and 401ks each year. So any deductions you have, things like that, that have that affect your taxes, all of that. The ideal situation is to have good documentation on that, so someone can come behind you and handle that without with a lot of difficult research. And again, if you have a business of any sort, good records there is essential. See what else I may want to. And one last thing here is in the year of death, there are two tax returns that need to be filed. One is the normal tax return, whether it's individual or joint. And the second is a tax return for your estate. So in the final year, there's actually two returns, and that estate tax return is different. And funeral arrangements, I know my mother passed away in 2012, and about a year before, she and I she lives about 3 hours from Charlotte, and so I went up to her house, and she and I went to the funeral home. She picked out her casket, made all the arrangements for her funeral, the type of service, who was to conduct it, etc. And she even wrote her own obituary. So even though her situation was fairly straightforward, it was very, very helpful to me for her to have already done that, because it simplified the job that I had to do. So I think you can take a lot of pressure off of your family by doing this, and it assures that your final wishes are kept. I mean, you may live another 20 years, but still, it's something that's something we don't know, and I just think at our age, it's a good idea to plan this. And talk a little bit about the letter format. The layout and the style really is based upon your preferences, and also the complexity of what you're dealing with. Some people may have a pretty simple letter to write, others are much more complex. So that will somewhat dictate how this is to be done. What I recommend is using attachments for things like for lists in some documents. Examples would be all the contacts, all the accounts, and auto deposits and payments. Just, in the last 5 years, we've had to change our checking account twice because of hacks of different types. And whenever that happens and you go to your bank and tell them that somebody has stolen one of your checks or is aware of your checking account number, they will immediately inform you that you're going to change your checking account that day, and you don't get to vote on that. They do it for you. And so then you have the challenge of informing all of the auto payments and auto deposits, all of those companies. And in my case, I had 30 days to do that. So it wasn't a simple task for me, and I knew what they all were. But If, for example, you pass away and your spouse has this, he or she will have to change that account fairly promptly. So they would be looking at that sort of situation fairly quickly. So again, having all that documented is really very important. And all the other things we've mentioned, personal assets and financial assets. And I've already mentioned having a paper statement for any electronic account. And the way my letter is structured, I started with a checklist, and each item in the checklist is no more than 2 lines. And then it's followed for a detailed set of instructions for those items that require it. Some of the items will be obvious when you in the checklist, others maybe not and would require more explanation. But you don't want to bog down your checklist by, writing a paragraph or two about items, because that way that will get to be a rather lengthy checklist. And here's an example of try to give you an example of what my checklist looks like, or to-do list. And I'm not going to go through each item, but some of these are things, just sort of obvious things that need to occur. Handling of your body and funeral arrangements and so forth. You'll need 3 original copies of death certificates. So some financial institutions will require that. And retrieving the estate documents from a safety deposit box at the bank. Probate the will. Notify the North Carolina retirement system of my death. And in my case, I have Medicare supplement with Mecklenburg County, so they would need to be informed about that. I have done the unenviable task of doing my obituary. That's a creepy thing to feel about. And then inform all the other providers, change car registration. And one thing people need to be aware of is if you are married and your spouse now survives you, they will need to update their estate documents to reflect that. And then inform all of the financial institutions. And I mentioned the credit freeze earlier. And then filing of estate taxes and do any necessary required minimum distributions if that applies to you. And there likely are additional things. There are additional things on mine. There likely would be on yours. But this gives you an idea of the types of things there. And I find doing it in a checklist to be a handy way to do it, just so you can make sure everything gets done and you can quickly review that, because you will be going through that multiple times to make sure everything gets done. And final thing here is some recommendations of things you really need to do. First is review and update your letter every year. There's a lot of detailed information in that letter, and it's contact information, accounts, and so forth. And in the course of 1 year, some of that will change. In the course of several years, you'd probably have quite a bit of change in that. So it's important to keep that up to date, so people are not going to have to jump through a lot of hoops to figure that out. Keep a copy of this document in a safe place, ideally a safety deposit box or safe, because to me, this is just as important as all your estate documents. And then give copies of this to your loved ones and the executor who is tasked with carrying out your final instructions. And don't just give a copy to them, but review the letter with them to make sure they understand it. It's going to be a complex letter in many situations. And so it's important that they understand it. And so if you just give a copy to them and they walk off, chances are there's going to be things there that they don't understand, or it could be you didn't effectively communicate what you needed to for them to handle it. And then update your instructions as needed. And oftentimes, whoever is handling your affairs will need help from others to complete execution of the letter. It can be a state attorney, a tax professional, a financial advisor, or someone with computer proficiency. Perhaps your loved one is not terribly adept at dealing with navigating the internet and all the other things they might have to do. So all of those are potential things. You need to think ahead to make sure they get the help they need to be able to handle all of this. So that is it. And so I would be available for questions if you have any. And Daryl, I guess you'll want to manage that effort.
I can. If you would like to raise your hand unmute and ask a question, that would be great. I did have one, or place your question in the chat and we will answer it. I did have one question regarding perhaps a template of the letter. Jerry, do you have one?
Well, no, I don't have a template per se. What I tried to do is give you an example from which you could do a template of your own.
Okay.
I've not developed a template for that.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
Yes.
Yes, Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, okay.
Is there any way we can get a copy of his presentation?
Yes. Yeah, I will provide that to Daryl, and then she could distribute it to everybody that's on the Zoom call today.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. SBD, you had your hand up?
Yes, I was going to ask the same question, make a copy of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
All right. Is there anyone else? Is there some place to get this information from a state or legal source?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is there some place to get this information from a state or legal source?
As far as I'm not aware of this information being in any of those places. I'm sure someone could do it for you for a fee, but it's a fairly complex undertaking. At least it was for me. Some people would be
Hold on, I have to do it again. Okay, go ahead. You need to unmute. Jerry, you need to unmute.
all right, you got me too.
I did.
Okay.
I'm still getting the feedback. I'm not sure where it is coming from.
Well, I see we've got at least a couple of people that are not muted.
Okay, I'm gonna remute everyone, and once John is within stop, it stopped. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay.
I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's
me try
BZW P001. When that person comes online, it comes up.
Okay. Let me see. I'm gonna have to try it again. I can mute everybody. All right, Jerry, you need to unmute yourself to continue to speak.
Okay. Like I say, I'm not aware of a place that you can get this. You might get, if you do a search on the web, you may find pieces of it, or you may actually find something that's fairly good. I have not tried to do that. I sort of, it evolved from my particular need and just thinking logically about what many people would require in this situation. But like I say, there may be something out there. I've just not tried to find it.
Okay, thank you. I think Galaxy had her hand up. Galaxy S20 FE 5G. Okay. Does anybody else have a question? Yes, Frank, is that you with VZW?
Think so. Hold on,
Okay.
hold on. Am I back with you now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I wanted to thank Jerry very much for doing this for us for District 7. And I'm from Harnett County, and I retired from state government with the governor's budget office. And I've been on with the board for about 6 years now. And we've really made some huge strides in the last 5 or 6 years to provide information for our members. And I thank everybody that's been involved with that. So I hope our members realize how much more information we're getting now, that they can tell their friends about it and have them join the association. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. And Frank is one of our district directors. Does anyone else have a question for Jerry? Sabra, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She said you can get this information through the credit union for a fee, and they will help you with this.
Is that the state credit union?
Yes.
Yes.
That's interesting. So, glad to know that. So I guess my question, would it be as comprehensive as what I've laid out, or maybe more so? I don't know.
Yeah. It could be also that they include estate planning with it. Don't know either. I do know that they do that. Tim, did you want to comment?
Yeah, actually, I work with the credit union with my parents, so they do something that's a portion of this credit union with my parents, but not the full scope that Jerry provided.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim. And we do have a question from Mary. What did you say, Frank, about Facebook and social meeting requests?
Okay. Yes, what I mentioned on Facebook was that there's an ability to memorialize a Facebook page of someone who is deceased. It would require an authorization form, along the lines of what I mentioned. And, you'll get a copy of this presentation so you can see what that is. And that's probably something that, a state attorney would have to draft for you. But the benefit of that is some people have rather extensive Facebook pages with lots of information about their life and that of their loved ones, a lot of memorable events within it, that kind of thing. And if to memorialize that is quite, it's quite valuable from a sentimental perspective. So again, in order to do that, you would need to be authorized to do so. And, you need to have that form. I'm not sure if that's something you could do yourself. Probably you could check with Facebook and find out what they actually require. It may be maybe you can avoid having to go through the legal expense of getting something drafted. But I would check with Facebook to find out what their requirements are. But again, there are other companies out there. Some people are very extensive in Twitter, or perhaps I'm not up to date on all the different social media outlets. But if there are others for which you would like access, I would recommend checking with that particular company to see what has to be done.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And I see that Tim has put in information on the State Employees Credit Union Services in a link. So I'm going to capture that link myself, and then we can make sure that we send it out when we send out the presentation.
Daryl, this is Frank again. Okay.
Yes.
I just was reading my Living Power earlier today before I got on. And if everybody would look at that Living Power handout that we most recently got, on page 12 at the bottom, it talks about what the State Employees Credit Union can do. And that's a good follow-up with Jerry, that he might want to look at that too. I know they do that, but there are fees involved, as there are with any attorney doing anything, but there are fees involved with it. But it's on page 12 at the bottom of the page.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, that might be well worth doing, even if it isn't quite as extensive as what I've presented today.
Right.
It could still be very helpful. It's getting you the foundation for everything you might need. Then you can add to that other things that you might want to add.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Wow, well, we really, really, truly appreciate all of you attending today. And we know that this information is so valuable that we've been actually trying to get it out to a large number of our members. So thank you so much for joining us at this. And Jerry, thank you. I just got one message. Great presentation. Thank you. And like we said, we will get this information out to you in the next few days so that you can review it at your pleasure. Mary, excuse me, would you like to say anything as we start to close out?
I just want to say I want to thank him for the presentation. As someone who's recently lost my husband, I'm still processing some of this information, and everything that he said is right on point. And I was particularly interested in the Facebook information because that's where we are now, trying to make sure we keep that information. Unfortunately, I don't have this Facebook password, so can't really get into that. Never thought about the social media aspect, but this has been very helpful. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm going to go through and highlight some things. But it has been a personal journey, and just this information sort of reinforces everything that I've gone through, and then some of the things like the taxes and things now that I'm still facing. So thank you, Jared, for that presentation. Very helpful, very meaningful. So I hope
you're very
others
welcome.
got as much out of it as I did. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody attending, and I thought there were some very good questions. A couple of them that were, even though I've done this several times, there were a couple of questions you asked that we'd not got before, so that was very helpful. So thanks again.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mary and Frank and Jerry and Tim and Carl for participating today. We really appreciate that. And to all of you who attended, as well as to all of you who asked the questions.